When we put this symposium together each year, we think about things that you might like to hear about that are going on outside the ivy-covered walls, as it were. We try to bring in somebody to provide a government perspective of what's going on, and we try to bring in someone who is a leader in industry as our keynotes. And these individuals provide perspective on what they see happening in the world, particularly as it relates to the whole arena of cyber that we're working in. And often those views provide new opportunities, new vistas for things that you can do and places to go to work, problems to address, upcoming trends, or declining trends. Our speaker today is somebody we've known for many years. We've had contact off and on as he has moved through different positions as an entrepreneur, starting as a consultant in the security business. He went on to become founder and president of Foundstone. Some of you may remember that from many years ago as a security services company that was then acquired by the McAfee company. And along with that, they acquired him as a CTO and executive vice president, where he served for several years until I think he got that idea for yet something else to go out and do, and became founder and president of industry-leading company CrowdStrike. He's also author. He's written the book Hacking Exposed, now through several editions. And that's a fascinating read for those of you who are interested in that area, who need a break from regular textbooks to see some of the practical things that are going on out in the world. And that will be part of his talk to us today. Please welcome George Kurtz.
Thank you, George. Thank you. Okay, let's pull this up here. Okay. All right. So let me, I hate standing behind a podium. Hopefully this mic works here. So once again, thanks for having me down here. This has been a great symposium. I got a chance to walk around and meet a bunch of the students and went through the various projects that are out there that I understand you'll be announcing awards for later, and was certainly impressed with the folks in the program. In the past, Foundstone and other places, we've hired a bunch of Purdue grads, so I know you guys are churning out high-quality folks that not only are smart technically, but are really prepared in a multidisciplinary fashion. So I just wanted to recognize that. Just a little bit about me. You got the rundown. Let me just give you 1 minute on what we're doing at CrowdStrike. Not a commercial, but just to frame what I'm going to talk about. As Spaff mentioned, I got the idea to go out and do something else, which is my love, starting and running companies and building new stuff. And a number of years back when I was at McAfee, I was involved in something called Operation Aurora and Shady Rat and a bunch of these targeted attacks. And I really felt that there was that market was being underserved in being able to not only identify those attacks, but also associate them with the threat actors. And I thought that was a missing link. And one of the things that we do at CrowdStrike is we use massive amounts of big data across a graph database to not only identify these sort of attacks, but then associate them with threat actors. So I just want to give you that perspective because it's going to be relevant to a lot of the intelligence that I'm going to go into here in a minute. So before we start, a word of thanks. I have to embarrass someone because obviously you guys know this book. So when I was a consultant, I started doing internet security consulting in, I don't know, 93 or something along those lines. And there weren't a lot of books that were out. And I was a junior guy, and one of the partners that I was working for said, hey, this internet thing is going to be big. We're not quite sure what it is, but go figure it out and, come up with some security practice around it. Okay, right. So I went and I was always a computer guy, but I had various disciplines in college. And, I started to research and kind of pull all this stuff together. Well, there weren't a lot of books out at the time, and this is over a number of years. And, two of the biggest books that really helped me put all this stuff together was Internet and Firewall Security, I think Cheswick and Belvin, and Practical Unix Security by this guy. So I always, I wrote the Hacking Exposed book back in 1999, and I get a lot of students and people that come up to me going, hey, you helped me get into security, I read your book. It really was, one of those books that really pointed me in the right direction. So, when I think about Practical Unix Security, I'm not sure how many folks have continued to read this. I hope you do. But, it was one of the books. There weren't a lot of books out. Now you go to the bookstore, Amazon, there's internet security books everywhere. There weren't a lot at the time. So this is one that certainly helped me, get things rolling in putting together these methodologies at the time. So thank you for that. Let me talk a little bit about the agenda. I really want to go through this intelligence-driven approach, which is really important to me, and I think it is important to most companies and organizations. And folks are just starting to realize the power of intelligence and how you link intelligence into a security practice. But it's been very hard and long in coming for them to actually operationalize security intelligence. And you hear a lot about it, but you don't really know how to operationalize it. So I'm going to go through the state of kind of security where we're at today. We're going to talk about a few things that are near and dear to my heart, like pandas, bears, and kittens. And then we'll drive into this intelligence-driven security approach, and I'll give you my parting thoughts. So no PowerPoint would be complete without the obligatory press tear sheets. This is that slide. And I put this in there because if you've been under a rock, you haven't seen, as I call it, the year of the breach last year. But it was really, I think, again, one of those watershed moments where just week after week after week, there's another breach, finally culminating with the target breach that we actually saw. And when we look across, either a DDoS attack or Russians hacking all these computers or, the target headlines, you can really see the interconnected dependencies that we have as a country and as a society. Unfortunately, for some, like the CIO at Target, there are casualties when we think about security and some of the ramifications of not being secure. Now, the reason, I'm a technical guy, but when I talked yesterday, I really try to help frame things. Yeah. Oh, okay, I'm going to turn this off. There we go. I really like to talk about kind of the practical and the business aspect of security. And I think that is one of the areas where far too many times security practitioners, they get caught up in the bits and the bytes, and they really don't put into perspective what it means from a business perspective. It's pretty easy when you go through this slide to go, okay, bad things happen and you lose your job, because that's the real world, right? That's what happens. It's not just a bunch of bits and bytes and registry settings. And this is a real impact. The other thing that I like to talk about is the financial impact. How many people know this company, AMSC, American Super, okay. This is a very interesting case because AMSC, they make basically windmill technology. Last I checked, China was very interested in windmill technology. Well, all of their customers were from China. There was a breach and there was intellectual property that was stolen. And literally in one fell swoop, their 5 major customers were gone. They didn't need AMSC anymore. And AMSC stock went like that. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I can read that chart. That's not good, right? That is not a good chart. Literally, they lost $1 billion in market cap in one night, okay? Again, when we think about the impact of this to corporations, companies, to the boardroom, again, putting it into the context of what board members and executives understand, which is, time, money, or going to jail, right? Losing your job. That's probably in the mix as well. So if you have any spare time, this is a good one to look up, where we see the real impact of intellectual property theft. This is one that was public. There's so many that we get involved in and investigate personally, from a company perspective, that never make the light of day. You never see them in the press, and sometimes they're far worse than this, kind of behind the scenes. So where are we at today? The Maginot Line security. I remember internet and firewall security. It was the moat and castle, and build these big bulkheads and keep people out, and belt suspenders and all this stuff. Well, the reality is that that's not working, right? That's good hygiene, And that's good to aspire to, but that's not going to work in total in the real world. So I'll let you read this, but I'll summarize it. You know, the new normal is the bad guys are going to get in. And it's unfortunate, you know, as a technology provider, as someone who's been in the security technology industry a long time, I wish someone would come up here and just say, hey, we've got the magic bullet, and we can wave the magic wand, and all of a sudden your security problems disappear. Well, that's not the case, right? It's just not practical. So I have my own quote by me: you can never be truly secure, you just exist in a state of dissecurity. And I say dissecurity because, as I was telling Spaff last night, one of my hobbies is I like to race cars. And people always ask me, I have a race car, just a track car, and they always ask, well, what kind of shape is this thing in, and what kind of repairs do you need, and that kind of stuff. And I said, well, it's never truly fixed. It's always in a state of disrepair, right? And it's a spectrum of disrepair. I mean, it'll run, but it's never truly, you know, working properly. That's just the way it is. And I feel that's the same way in security. It's always in a state of disrepair, and it's a continuum. You know, in some areas, it's really good because you focused on it. In other areas, because it wasn't, quote, PCI compliant, right, and nobody even put any money towards it, people just fall short in what they need to do. So you're never truly there, and it's more of a, you know, the old trite saying, it's more of a journey than a destination, I guess. You're never going to really get there, but people at least need to realize that this goal, and particularly at the executive level, you are never going to get to 100% secure, and you just have to live with the inevitable breaches. I haven't been to one major corporation, Fortune 1000 company, that hasn't had a breach, okay? And if they say no, they're just lying to you or they're clueless, because they all have one, and it's just a fact of life. So you've got to be able to deal with that very quickly. So Josh kind of mentioned this part of the talk yesterday in terms of my view of the state of the industry and what I think people focus on. And, you know, there's a couple of takeaways, and this is one of them. And I got this idea in traveling, I don't know, about 300,000 miles my last year at McAfee, literally around the globe, meeting with all the largest customers. And they would, you know, I'd come into a meeting and we'd exchange pleasantries, and, you know, immediately it was, because I was CTO at McAfee, you know, signatures are not working, AV's not catching targeted attacks, you know, what are you going to do to kind of up the game? We have this malware problem and it keeps getting worse. And I kept hearing that over and over and over again, and I really got to thinking about it. They believed they actually had a malware problem. Unfortunately, they had an adversary problem. And that's really the crux of it. If you think about malware itself, malware it doesn't just materialize, right? Somebody creates it. Somebody has a plan that's designed to infect specific organizations. So when we think about targeted attacks, right, we're going to create a plan, tasking orders. We're going to create malware. We're going to deliver it to the organization. We're going to get in. We're going to execute those tasking orders. We're going to exfiltrate data, whatever it is. And malware is really just the first stage of that. So when we think about malware itself, and I see this a lot too in research and, you know, new malware algorithms and developments, and, you know, that's all good, but the reality is this is a people problem. This isn't necessarily a malware problem. And that's a lot for people to sometimes get their head around. It's a simple concept, but, you know, when you step back and you think about it, it's, you know, malware is nothing more than digital bullets that are being fired at you, right? So it's not the bullet that's shooting you. It's the person who's got the gun who's delivering the bullet that's shooting you. So I like to think about these sort of things as people issues as opposed to pure technology issues. I think we did a good job yesterday, Josh, in terms of going through the various groups. This is my simple version of his player cards that are out there. And when I look at this scale of, you know, terrorist and threat sophistication all the way up through nation-state actors and the capability for damage, you know, you've got your various groups that Josh went through if you saw his presentation in terms of the crimeware guys all the way up to the nation-state actors. One of the things, and I won't go through all of those, but one of the things that I want to call out here in this continuum is that the threat sophistication has gone up, but the capability for actual protection has gone down, right? So the ability to protect is actually down while threat sophistication is up. And that's unfortunate. So the bad guys are getting smarter at a faster rate than the security industry can actually respond to it. And some of the attacks that we deal with, you could look at and say, well, that's not really that sophisticated, and it's simple, but it worked, right? The bar only has to be so high or so low for them to jump over it, and they're only as good as they need to be. I mean, why would you spend the time and effort to create an elaborate plan to get into a bank if you can walk in, the door is open, and you can just steal the money? I mean, it's simple, it's crude, but it worked, right? So the bar is only as high as it needs to be, and they just simply jump over it. But unfortunately, they keep iterating their techniques faster and faster than the security industry can, and really that capability for damage is higher than our ability to protect against it. One of the outcomes of this is that if you look at the security industry in general, and you take firewalls and antivirus and web gateways and IPSs, right, all good stuff, it's fine for the opportunistic threat, right, just general hygiene. But when you think about the targeted attack, it doesn't matter what you have, they're still getting in. I mean, I would ask the question, and either raise your hand now or get me afterwards if you know of any true targeted attacks against the corporation that didn't have a firewall or antivirus. I mean, it just happens, right? You have them, and they still get in. So the issue is not about necessarily the technology and not having these technologies, right? Because they're kind of basic hygiene. They're checklist bunny stuff. You know, if you go in an auditor, you got to have a firewall, you got to have AV. I mean, it just is what it is. But what I'm saying here is that there is this concept of silent failure, okay? And silent failure is, you know, the system is going to fail. Well, you should design around that. Any pilots here? Probably a few, right? Any pilots? Yeah, right? I mean, when you're flying, how many gauges do you have, altimeters? One altimeter? Normally it's like 2 or 3, isn't it? And you're, okay, in his plane, well, don't fly with him. But most commercial planes have like 2 or 3 because they realize if one fails, you know, you kind of you need another 2 to tell you what's going on. So the point here is, we know the system is designed to fail. It is. It's going to fail. The problem is it fails silently. And when it fails silently, you have adversaries that are in your network for 12 months, 18 months, 24 months that you never knew about. We do incident response services as well, and we go out to companies all the time that Amy knocks on the door of and says, we found your data somewhere on the internet. You have a problem. And the company goes, oh, you know, it's one of those oh moments, right? And you know, you go in and you start to look around. They've been there. Not only one group, but 2 groups or 3 groups. Different groups have been in the organization stealing the latest chip designs, intellectual property, for the better part of 2 years. Why? Because the systems that we knew would fail failed silently, and nobody knew about it. So my point here is that we know we're going to fail. I'm not saying don't have a firewall or AV or any of that stuff. That's all just hygiene, and you should have it. But if it's going to fail, it shouldn't fail silently, right? You need to build failure and failure identification into your model. So what has the industry really focused on, in my opinion? Gets back to what I talked about earlier, right? Malware. Every time I turn around, it's about malware. Here's another piece of malware, and it's a file, and all I hear about is malware, malware, malware. And that's fine, because that's, you know, that's kind of an artifact or a digital bullet. But the reality is, without knowing who is behind the malware or why they were actually delivering it or creating it, you're only getting part of the picture. So when we think about an intelligence-driven security model, it's really about linking together the who, the what, and the why. Again, this was a common theme from yesterday that Josh talked about. And why is this so important? Well, let me give you a scenario. There was a research paper that I worked on with my co-founder, Dmitry Alperovich, called Night Dragon. Okay, so Night Dragon was really a paper that kind of exposed the systemic attacks on the oil and gas industry by the Chinese. Now, we know the Chinese are pretty interested in oil and gas because it's a country that's really focused on natural resource and getting as money as it can to keep the economy going. And in this particular case, what we exposed was a campaign against all the big oil and gas companies that were focused on getting in and looking, basically getting into the organization, into kind of their legal groups and business units, and figuring out how much they were actually going to bid on a parcel of land that had mineral rights, right? So what happens is, that, you know, these big parcels of land and places, and probably well, all over the world. They go up for auction, and then the oil and gas companies bid on them for the mineral rights. Well, if you could walk around the table when you're negotiating with somebody, and you can actually look at what they're going to bid, do you think you can slightly outbid them? Right? So we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar issue here. Oil and gas mineral rights, this is not hundreds of thousands, this is the billions and billions of dollars. So they were getting in, basically understanding what was going to be bid, and then bidding, just enough to get what they needed, and scooping up all these parcels of land. Now, if you went into a CIO and you said, Mr. or Mrs. CIO, we have a problem. We found downloader XYZ, generic Trojan ABCD on our network that's infected our, one of the hives in our registry, and it's, calling out and, making DNS requests every minute, blah, blah, blah. Somebody's eyes are going to glaze over when you have that discussion with them, because that's meaningless, right? And that's what most security practitioners do. They kind of go through the techno-babble of what's going on. Now, however, if you think about going into the CIO's office and saying, we have a problem. We found the remnants of some malicious software on our network, and that was actually put there by one of the Chinese groups that's interested in the oil and gas industry. And in fact, boss, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get that sensitive information to outbid us so that potentially we could lose billions of dollars as a company. I think we should maybe invest in that area and try to defend against that threat. Which conversation do you think is going to be more effective? Okay? As an industry, what do we default to? The shiny thing. Look, there's a squirrel. Look, we get distracted, right? New shiny object. Here we go. So my point here is the ability to actually link the who and the why is very important to drive risk and to drive priority within the organization. And I get this question all the time because we talk about attribution, which is, okay, so, some guy, some gal, some group in China, Russia, wherever is hacking us. Big deal. I can't go after them. Well, that's not the point. The point is you need to know who your adversary is to be able to defend against that particular threat. We realize today that we can't defend against every threat that's out there. I haven't gone into too many companies where they said, George, you know what? It's your day today. We've got unlimited time, unlimited budget, and unlimited people to buy all the technology and stuff you have. It happened once and I woke up. My wife said, get the kids to school, right? I was dreaming, end of the quarter. It doesn't exist. So you have limited resources, limited time and expertise. You have to be able to focus those against the very threat actors that are trying to get into your organizations. It really helps drive priority. Right. So one of the big banks that we work with, we sat down with them when we were building our technology, and they were helping us, giving us ideas of what they wanted. And their comment was, if it doesn't get into a risk register, it doesn't matter for us. We have so much stuff going on, we can't handle it all. 300,000-400,000 computers all over the world, they can't deal with it. So if it doesn't match up to an operational risk, a financial risk, a reputation risk, they don't care about it. So this is my point in security. I think this is one of the, there's lots of smart folks in security, and there's lots of really good technology. But I think this whole kind of soft aspect of what does it all mean and how does it kind of interrelate to the business is one of the lost arts, and certainly, hopefully, a takeaway from my presentation to the folks here and certainly some of the students at the back. It isn't just about the technology. It's really about linking all together and driving business and risk prioritization within the business. Okay, so let me transition here and introduce you to the pandas, kittens, and bears. Hopefully you're all pet lovers, right? Or animal lovers, I should say. Okay, so this is a map. This is not a complete map, but just a subset of some of the adversary groups that we track. So at CrowdStrike, we have a team of, we have a bunch of folks, but we have a team of 25 people that do nothing but actually track the adversary. It looks in part like a small little government organization, although we can't do all the SIGINT that they do, as you very well know if you've been reading the newspaper. So, but it's organized in a very similar fashion to be able to understand the adversary groups that are out there by theater, by group, and by campaign, linguists that speak the local language, understanding how the adversary works and what they're doing and who they're targeting, and then being able to focus on those individual groups and collect more information so that as an industry, And for our customers that fall into a particular sector, we can understand the types of attacks in advance that they may be seeing. And I'll give you a few examples of that. So on the left, you'll see the pandas. And as you probably well figured out already, you smart folks here, the pandas are from China. The bears are from Russia. The kittens, I guess Persian cat, is from Iran. I didn't come up with all these. You know, we've got researchers that like coming up with all these names. And then there's individual names in front of them. So let me give you an example. Putter panda, again, we leave the creativity to the research analysts, right? We didn't dumb it down with some marketing term. But there was a spearfishing campaign in the it was the missile defense industry, right? And it was related to some golf outing. So that's why the Putter Panda was in there, because it was one of the campaigns that we were tracking. But anyway, you get the idea that we can at least remember it by some of these interesting names that are out there. But when we talk about pandas, it's very easy then for people to go, okay, that's somebody or a group from China or Russia is bear. And this actually, other people have adopted this naming convention. We publicly put it out there, and we do a lot of work in the community. So it is what it is. I know sometimes I was in Europe and I get called out on the slide, and they're like, "Well, where's the eagle slide? You know, where's the eagle?" So we don't have the eagle on here, but the eagle's been pretty busy over the last number of years, I guess. Okay, so let's meet Samurai Panda. So Samurai Panda is a group out of China that has been very active in Japan. So we were doing some work for a pretty large industrial company in Japan, and they had one sample. There's some bad stuff going on, and ultimately they came back and said, "We got one file for you, one sample. What do you know about it?" And we have something internal at CrowdStrike we call the Malware Genome Project. So we've got just about 120 terabytes of malware. I mean, it's a massive, massive repository, as big as any AV company. And we're part of that whole AV sharing sample. So every day we get another 200,000 samples of bad stuff. But basically what we've created is some technology that does clustering, basically a fuzzy logic algorithm does clustering on kind of like samples of related DNA. And this is kind of an interesting field when we think about attribution. And this is we call this Malgrind. It's sort of our attribution engine. And there's no, before I even get into any of the details of this, in intelligence there's no 100% perfect, just like in security there's no 100%. And when we think about the real world of intelligence, we say, okay, well, we think, there's weapons of mass destruction. Okay, well, we were wrong, right? Intelligence was bad. So there's a degree of confidence that's out there, and there's no 100% as we go through this. But there is pretty close and directional, and those are the things that we focus on. So in this particular case, we took that one sample, and we ID'd 300 other samples, like samples, because they shared enough DNA. Then we identified 42 unique campaigns from this particular actor. So we saw 42 individual unique campaigns, and then basically we turned that into 30 unique C2 servers, command and control servers. Now, why did I go through this example? Because what typically would happen, and this is one of the areas that really frustrated me being in the AV industry, right? It was a customer would find a piece of malware, they'd ship it up to their AV vendor, just pick one, doesn't matter, and somebody would grind, the chimps behind the scene would grind out a signature, and then boom, here you go, right? But no one was really taking the time or effort to answer the question, well, why was it there? Who was behind it? What are they after? It was just a file. It was literally just a file. And that's the wrong approach, right? The approach is ask the question behind the question. Why did it get there? Who was behind it? What are they after? So that's what we try to do. And in this particular case, we took one file, and it was this whole huge campaign that was systemically targeting most of the big, they have these big trading companies in Japan, these heavy industry, because they had a lot of technology, battery technology, and earth-moving technology, and oil-finding technology. I mean, you go down the list. This is what, again, gets the business people excited, when you can put it in terms of, hey, not only are we getting targeted, but all of our competitors are getting targeted, the industry is getting targeted, and here's what they're after. Now, when we think about the ability to do this, we've got some students in the back and folks from all over with various backgrounds. If you think about, if you code, or if you programmed, if you think about your code, I almost guarantee you, you have similar traits in almost every program. You might use similar libraries. You might construct it in a way where your formatting is very similar. You use just a style, right? It's a style of how we talk, how we write, and how we write code. And that's just the way it is. I also bet, and you can back me up on this, Bath, that programmers are one of the, the group of the laziest people I've ever seen. Is that true? Yeah. Okay. What do? They keep reusing the old stuff. They, write it once and reuse it. Well, do you think the adversaries just rewrite everything from scratch? No, they're lazy like everybody else. Hey, it worked once. Why don't we just tweak it slightly just to evade antivirus, avoid signature detection, and boom, we're off to the races. So when people make this comment like you can't do attribution and the internet is anonymous and you can't do any of this stuff, you haven't sat down to actually do it because it really isn't all that hard. Particularly if you kind of start from the malware itself, which is kind of the evidence, the artifact, right? It's delivered. IP addresses, you can launder those through various connections and anonymize them. I get that. But when you think about what you actually have in your hand, it's a digital bullet, right? And you can analyze a digital bullet. Well, where did it come from? It came from a very similar gun. It might be a little bit unique because we can make it unique in the digital world, but it actually was shot by that group. So that's what we do. We built technology to do that. And, that's, we sort of think we're pioneering, some of this stuff has been done, but kind of putting it all together is pioneering this art of attribution, which is an art, it's part art, part science. So that's a little bit about our Samurai Panda friends. Now, this is really interesting one. This is Anchor Panda, PLA Navy. Again, those crazy guys at CrowdStrike, they like different naming conventions. So the Anchor is the PLA Navy. And they target governments, military organizations, non-government organizations, oil, anything with sort of, related to maritime activities, if you will. And these are the countries that they actually targeted all over the map, but anything related to, if you had ports or maritime activities. This is the breakdown just over a 6-month period that we observed. So we had very unique visibility into their infrastructure. And we were actually seeing these campaigns get spun up before they were actually delivered. And in this particular case, it was mostly focused on the defense industrial base, and then broken down between NGO, military, engineering, et cetera. There's one anomaly on here, if you can read that from the back. Anybody see this one anomaly of an industry? Retail. What the heck is the PLA targeting a retail company for, right? You kind of ask the question. Well, they do make mistakes. They fat-fingered the domain name, and they just got it wrong, okay? So they were looking for someone else, and they happened to get someone in retail. Oh, well, that was the junior varsity team, right? There's various teams that are out there. You got the JV guys just cranking away until they bring in the big guns. This was really interesting because at Christmas time, I'm originally from the East Coast, so I'm used to this kind of weather. I live in California now, so I go back every Christmas with the family. Wife comes from a big Italian family, so if you spend any time in a big Italian family, you realize that Christmas Eve dinner is like, the Last Supper. It's a feast beyond feast, right? So my phone is going crazy with all these email alerts, right? Because we have all this stuff monitored, and when activity's happening, we see it. So the guys are emailing me going, Anchor Panda guys are spinning up a campaign Christmas Eve. What better time? Everybody's home. Nobody's around, right? It's a good time to work. And not a lot of people are kind of worried about security, worried about, dinner. So we basically see this campaign unfolding, and we see a bunch of companies that we know that they're about to hit. So we literally see them staging a phishing campaign, creating the malware, unique malware from builders, importing a database of names into almost like a mail merge, and they're getting ready to fire it out. So we're literally seeing the attack before the attack happens. And for just good citizen type purposes, we notified a bunch of the companies. They weren't all our customers, but we had relationships with a lot of the big defense industrial based companies. And Christmas Eve, we're calling people that we know, and we're emailing them saying, hey, just be on alert. You're going to get phished. This is what it'll look like. Here's kind of the indicators, et cetera. And they were quite happy about that. They're like, how did you figure that out? I'm like, well, this is kind of what we do for a living. But in any event, my wife is yelling at me, dinner's getting cold and we're over there. You've all been there, right? I'm sure. And we're trying to do the notification on this. But this was a really active campaign. This is just one of many groups that are out there. And you can look at their tactics and their procedures and figure out that it's a particular group. Now, if you look at their kill chain, this isn't 100% accurate sort of kill chain model. What were they doing? Well, from a reconnaissance perspective, they were going out to various companies, organizations, government groups, what have you, and they were dumping as many email addresses and databases as they could. There was one targeting group they were targeting, I should say, from India, and they literally had, the government had a complete database of like all the email addresses for all these officials. They just dumped that. So they had all of these email addresses and data in one spot, and they would just harvest that from all the publicly accessible spaces. And then they had a pretty interesting attack related to MSHTA. Anybody know what MSHTA is in the Windows world? No? Okay, so MSHTA is a great piece of functionality that Microsoft gives us, which allows you to completely bypass any of the IE zone restrictions. How nice of them. So that was actually what was used, and they would send the spearfish, which I'm going to show you here in a minute, but basically bypass any of the browser security zone settings. They would deliver the spearfish. They would exploit some of these CVEs. These are quite old CVEs, but guess what? People don't have a patch. They're still running XP, on and on. As an industry, we should be embarrassed. We can't even get passwords right? So this is just, I had the same speech, not quite, 10 years ago. It hasn't changed much, right? Bad passwords, no patching. So easy to get in here. They installed one of many RATs, remote access tools. If you're not familiar with those are quite handy. Ghost Rat, Poison Ivy, Pathfinder. They then established a command and control connection back out from that computer. And then once they were on, they were like a vacuum, folks, a vacuum. They could not get the data out of there fast enough by the truckload, and sensitive data like shipping plans, port plans, where cargo was going. They wanted to know everything. That cargo, that ship, where was it going? We want to know about what's in it, right? I mean, there's a lot of, if you think about just shipping itself, there's a lot of information just on what moves where and who's going to whom. So anyway, they exfiltrated data by the truckload, and it was quite effective. Now, this is one of the documents that they used, or images. So this image actually contains malware. I think it's a JPEG, and for the technically minded folks, you can append a bunch of stuff to a JPEG. Your browser will happily render it, but there's still a bunch of stuff to the back of it. So they had like a VB script, a multi-stage VB script. So your browser would go, hey, here's the image, and oh, by the way, there's some VB script. We'll execute that too, behind the scenes. Thank you very much. So they would pull down droppers, right? First stage dropper, pull the file down, get all the remote access tools in, and then off to the races they were. This is actually their mail delivery program, the preferred mail merge tool for the bad guys, right? They would take the malware that they would build, they would take the email addresses they harvested, they would put them all together, and then they go send. Now, my son is 12, my version of Dennis the Menace, right? I keep getting called into school, Sir, you have a problem? Yeah, what's that? Your son has been hacking the computer. Really? Sir, where did he learn that? His wife, my wife, right? His mom. Not his wife, my mom. His mom. I screwed the joke up. Okay. But in any event, you get the point. He's 12, and he could use these tools. Right? It's so easy to do. This actually is one of the remote access tools. We had to do the translation on it. You can see, that it's installing service host, which is a very common attack file within the Windows world. It allows you to break through. Depends on your configuration of it, how you want to go through the firewall. The interesting thing about doing all the translation on this, and again, we've got linguists that do this, is that kept seeing this thing called Leaky Chicken. You're like, what's a leaky chicken? Well, leaky chicken is really a compromised system. When you do the literal translation, it translates to leaky chicken. So you kind of got to know like what's happening behind the scenes. It's kind of a fascinating, art to go through all this stuff. But again, these are the tools that are created. Some of them are routine. Some of them seem unsophisticated, but they're pretty well organized in putting all this stuff together. And I think we had like 2 gigabytes of tools that we were able to collect. Some pretty interesting stuff. Okay, so switch gears to a strategic web compromise, better known as a watering hole attack, right? And these are very, very effective, and we're seeing more and more watering hole attacks. Why? Because people are getting a little bit smarter on the phishing attempts, right? I see an email that comes in, it kind of looks legitimate, but yeah, I'm just going to go right to the Amazon website or right to the UPS website. I'm not going to click on that thing. So people are getting a little bit better, not a lot, but a little bit. So strategic websites basically allow the adversary to compromise a website, place their malware on that website, and then the general idea is we want to get as many people as we can to connect to that website, hopefully within the target environment that we're trying to get into. So I guess last year there was a pretty big Java exploit that was a 0-day, and it just ran up and down Silicon Valley because Silicon Valley uses mostly Macs, right? And what they were doing is they were getting into the websites of where developers normally go. Hey, I'm developing code for the new iOS, application. I've got to go get new libraries or whatever. Well, if you break into those, the developers are going to show up there, right? And those are easy ways to basically compromise some of the technology companies that they wanted to get into. So this is again, just the summary of what I talked about. It's pretty hard to detect those, not very easy. It's not coming in via an email or a spearfish. It's, your folks are going out somewhere getting themselves infected. And the programs that are out there are pretty sophisticated. They can tell what browser you're running, what operating system you're running, whether you have patches. It's an auto root sort of toolkit, and it just goes through, okay, yeah, I profiled what George is running. Yep, we found one, boom, we pop it, and then it goes into a nice dashboard that allows you to manage it and understand all of the various connections and companies and computers that you've actually compromised. So this is something that we just came out with. We had a 2013 kind of recap, a threat report. It's actually on our CrowdStrike website if you're interested. But one of the takeaways was a kind of a detailed profile of Energetic Bear. And we believe this is the Russian government who's, people always talk about China. I mean, China's just, they're notorious because they get caught, right? And they don't care. They just keep throwing stuff at the problem, and eventually they're going to get in. The Russians, they've got some really, really good folks, and they're very sophisticated, right? So in this particular case, we saw them targeting energy companies, technology, research, government, construction, kind of anything related to. Playing the guitar, there he is, Spap. All right. So we've got tools that they were using, this HavXRat and others. And let me just give you a little bit of a breakdown on what we saw there. So it was a lot on intelligence gathering. It wasn't so much IP exfiltration. It was more just intelligence, wanting to know what was actually going on. And based upon the targeting that we saw, it certainly appeared to be government related. And if you do this long enough, you can see, just like in the physical world, right, how criminals operate. They're smash and grab sort of robberies. They're like, okay, they just, got smashed and got in and got what they wanted. And there's others that are more well thought out, if you will, right? And they're after a particular item, and you know why they're after that item, et cetera. In this particular case, we were able to kind of observe what they were targeting and how they were operating, and it certainly looked like the TTPs, if you will, tactics, techniques, and procedures of a government organization. The other thing too is and these are just characteristics, and you can't rely on necessarily just one aspect of this. But when you put all of them together, you go, that kind of smells like, the Russians have been very, very busy. But this is build times, a lot of the malware that was used, and it was constantly being changed. But we plotted that, and it was consistent with sort of operating hours within Russia, if you will. Again, these are not 100% type things, but when you start adding up how they operate, which we've seen before, most of all of our analysts came out of the government, They all had clearances, so it's not like they forgot how the Russians operate, right? It's kind of like, okay, you know, that looks like one of those. We put all this together, and we kind of went through the various attacks and what they did and wrote it up. But they were very, very active in oil and gas, and again, it was more around reconnaissance, which is not surprising given, you know, what they do from an energy perspective. It's still ongoing. You know, we don't know the full impact. We don't have all the details on it, but it's an ongoing effort, and you can see they've been very busy in various countries that are out there. So just, you know, food for thought. The next one is Magic Kitten, and these are our folks from Iran. And typically what we find with this group is, you know, their sophistication is getting a little bit better, not the best that's out there. But what we find is that they're very interested in kind of dissidents, right? Any person who might upset the apple cart in Iran and, you know, is going to cause a ruckus, they're really, really interested in. That's a lot of where we see the targeting. So it's not so much on getting intellectual property and stealing things. It's more around non-government organizations, universities, dissidents, you know, keeping tabs on people because, you know, obviously they want to keep the folks, you know, under the thumb of the regime. So we see a lot of targeting by this group, and, you know, sophistication, low to moderate, but, you know, fairly successful, I would say, using spear phishing and various rats that are out there. So this just gives you a quick rundown on some of the adversary groups that are out there, and it's actually fascinating when you go through each one of them and how they operate, and, you know, you see kind of groups kind of, you know, come and go and bleed over, and, you know, one faction goes to another. We also track Syrian Electronic Army and, you know, a bunch of other sort of hacktivist type groups, and, you know, the lines are blurring. You know, everything's kind of coming together. Even if you look at the crimeware groups, are using a lot of the tactics that, you know, have been, I would say, pioneered by, you know, some of the more nation-state adversary groups in terms of being able to target a particular organization, get in and exfiltrate data, but in this case, credit card information. But it isn't a haphazard event. It looks like it's a very targeted attack, getting in, getting what they need. So the lines are blurring across all these various groups that are out there. So we talked a little bit about this. I didn't remove the slide, but I guess I'll use it just to reinforce it out there. And it's the, you know, the OODA loop concept. And we went through this, so I won't beat it up to death, but it's something that we really believe in, this visibility and being able to kind of engage the adversary quicker than an OODA loop of 18 to 24 months. Like, that OODA loop doesn't work. I think you're going to lose on that dogfight. That's not a winning strategy. So when we think about kind of going through this OODA loop, well, if the adversary can get through this OODA loop before you, or you can get through this loop before the adversary, you know, that's going to be the way to win. So it's really about observability. It's about the ability to actually understand what's happening in your network, on your systems. It's layering in the intelligence approach, so it's not yet another piece of malware that, you know, you flatten a box. If you're involved in an organization or a company that, you know, your response plan is, we have a piece of malware, just reformat the box and blow down a new operating system, that's probably not a good plan, because they're still going to be in your organization. They're still going to be somewhere that you don't know, and, you know, your OODA loop is going to be very slow. It's really about understanding what's happening, who's targeting you, and then to be able to respond across the organization, understanding what their TTPs are and kind of getting inside their OODA loop. Where are they? Okay, they're here. Where are they going to go? How do we cut them off? You know, how do you stay ahead of what they want to do as opposed to just react and reformat a system where they're going, wow, this is just easy. Yeah, we lost that box, but we got 20 others. Okay, so this OODA loop concept is interesting. Again, we didn't develop it, but we sort of embrace it from a cyber. Did I use cyber? I did that for you. Okay, from a cyber perspective. Good thing Josh isn't here. All right, so raising the cost to the adversary. This is one of the other areas that we like to talk about. And if you think about cost being time and money, we've got this battle of malware, which is, let me just build this out here. This is very cheap. It's very easy to create a new piece of malware. I mean, you can do a million new pieces on a high-end multi-core system, just tweaking the signatures and the files themselves. So it's very easy to do that. But where does the industry focus? As I said earlier, when I started the presentation, it's all about the malware. Well, we found a new piece of malware. We got a new signature. Okay, let's start this process again, right? Just spin the wheel. It's very cheap to do that. But when you start to go through, again, this isn't quite an accurate kill chain, but when you start to go through creating a spearfish, okay, now I've got to go through and I actually got to create and put the effort in to create the spearfish and make it look real. Then what I have to do is I've got to go register some domains with some dynamic DNS providers. Not that hard, but a little bit more work. Then I've got to create a C2 channel, right? And the C2 channel is, how we're going to communicate and evade detection on the network. So we're going to create some protocols that, might be, comments in a HTML post request, which the comment crew actually does, right? Well, that takes time and effort to get all that to work. And then I've got to profile the victim. I've got to figure out, okay, who am I going to target? How am I going to get in? Then I'm going to get in and move laterally. I've got to figure out where I'm going to go. And then ultimately, I might have a single-use tool chain that I've got to use to get what I want. So when you think about this, I'll use the example that we're probably familiar with, which was the RSA Heist, right? Getting the kind of the seed values for the tokens. You guys remember that, right? So does anybody think that that actually took place in one day? Like, oh, here's RSA. Oh, wait, are those the tokens? Wow, serendipity, right? I mean, like, that just didn't happen. It was planned out. There were tasking orders, and it was a very well executed plan. Now, if you can sort of disrupt the adversary in this group, it takes a lot of time and effort to retool. It doesn't mean they won't retool, but they're probably not going to be in business, the next day. Now, if you find the one piece of malware that they're going to use to get in, guess what happens? They just create another one. But all of the other pieces are still in place, right? So you're not really dismantling anything across their kill chain or their infrastructure, which doesn't really raise cost. So one of the things that we like to talk about is, being able to look across that kill chain and disrupt multiple elements of it so that it becomes more expensive from a time and effort perspective. From a government perspective, unlimited time and money, yes, but you're not going to necessarily kind of retool the next day. And it's going to be, at least the frequency of that particular attack is going to decrease a bit. So again, just food for thought. It gets back to my overarching point is, the battle is here and the war is going to be won across this kill chain in some of those areas, right? All right, so let me wrap up here. If we think about being able to deal with this problem, I am certainly a fan of information sharing. We talked a little bit about that on the panel yesterday, being able to correlate this information and understand these attacks, how they work, and kind of share as an industry. And I think from a university perspective, that's one of the areas that I would focus on. I would certainly embrace is the ability to share this information at a global level, leveraging your peers in the community. And I was talking to a few of the folks yesterday at the event downstairs, and we were kind of laughing because they were talking about two government organizations that wanted to share information, and they couldn't do that because the lawyers got involved, right? And it was like, okay, but we have good information, and that government entity should know what we have, but the lawyers got involved. So typically what I see actually works is you basically direct the lawyers to that corner, you guys quickly scramble to that corner, and you huddle, and you start to share information, and you just keep those guys busy, right? That's really the only way it works. Unfortunately, when you get the lawyers involved, the information sharing seems to stop, but you can do a pretty good job just kind of informally, again, adopting various people, whether it's an FBI agent, not that they're going to share a lot back with you, but your peers in your industry is a good thing. Understanding the who, the what, and the why. Hopefully, I've given you, again, the takeaway on it isn't about going after somebody in some other country. It's about understanding that adversary that's trying to get into your organization, understanding how they operate, and then creating an effective intelligence-driven defense program to engage that adversary and at least identify them and hopefully be able to minimize any impact they have within your organization. They're not going to go away. Maybe they will get frustrated enough and go somewhere else. Maybe there's the virtual club. Remember the virtual the club? Remember that? I had that. My first car was a pile of junk, and I was so happy that I put a club on it. You know, remember those? It was like, somebody might steal this thing. I lived in New Jersey, though, which was the car capital, like, theft of the world. But it was annoying enough that hopefully somebody went to some other car that didn't have the club. You know, maybe there's a virtual club, which is we make it painful enough and these guys go somewhere else. I'm not quite sure that that's going to happen. My point, though, is when you can wrap this who, what, and why together, and you can tell the story to management or executives in time, money, compliance, or losing your job, you're going to be much more effective in the real world. That's the real world, right? It isn't just about the bits and the bytes. So, again, takeaway for you. And then this, you know, intelligence-driven security model. It's really focused on using intelligence and operationalizing intelligence, which a lot of people have a hard time. They just hear intel, and it's, you know, again, it's either a black art or it's some, you know, newfangled thing. But if you are able to manage and put the pieces together, you're going to be much more effective in telling the story, and more importantly than telling the story, to actually raise the bar and raise the level of security within, you know, your company, your organization, your university. So with that, I'm going to wrap up here. Let's see, timing-wise, we probably have a little bit of time for questions. So let me maybe pause and see if there's any questions that are out there. Okay. You've all gotten it? Test.
So we're in a state where cyber warfare is considered an effective means of engaging adversaries on the national and political scale. Mm-hmm. And the work that you're talking about, you have the nice slide with the pandas, bears, and kittens, and you don't mention the eagles at all. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's a lot of the work that you're doing that could help to inform the eagle, mm-hmm. or that could be used to inform the adversary about what the eagle is doing. Mm-hmm. Can you speak about where you stand on that subject? Is it more in the interest of providing everybody the best defense possible, or is it also is there also an interest in ensuring those who are defending and protecting the national infrastructure through cyber operations have the capabilities to evade the enemy's defenses as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you look at our philosophy, I mean, we don't have a lot in the slides, but you know, we're looking at the problem from a worldwide perspective, and not necessarily saying, okay, if we didn't see activity from one group or another, that we're not going to put it in our intelligence reports. You know, that particular group is pretty good, and they don't necessarily show up all over the place. I mean, they're not as noisy as many of the other folks that are out there. But as a company, you know, we're not focused on saying, okay, well, we're not going to, you know, if we find something related to that, we won't put it in there. And in fact, I mean, we started, you know, where it was quite easy and where we had a lot of expertise in terms of, you know, the China piece, and we continue to add out. You know, we've got all the cybercrime and other places. So we're not taking a stance that we won't put them in there. It just hasn't been a focus for us as a company. And you know, now kind of post last year, lots of companies that are outside the U.S. are going, hey, what else do you know on this stuff? So philosophically, we just want to put the best intelligence out and let people use it how they want to use it.
My question is a little bit of the grouping that you group nationwide, and you said, okay, the eagle is missing, I miss Europe. But actually what I see is that from a company perspective is that we are hacked by other companies that want to have either our IPR or threat our business. Mm-hmm. So for example, I work for Saab, a Swedish company. We do a fighter jet, mm-hmm. and when we go to the market, we meet, for example, the France Dassault aircraft, mm-hmm. and in that we get a higher level, closer to the actually when the bidding is closing of attacks. Mm-hmm. Of course, we don't know if it's the France or if it's Lockheed Martin or Boeing or whatever we are competing towards. But we see that also. So it's not just that, oh, the bad guys are the pandas, whatever, or eagles. It's not nationwide. It's actually the various, it's a lower level also between companies. So how do you look at that perspective?
Well, I think, isn't espionage, isn't that a French word?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, right? So, I mean, that group has done pretty well in the past, first class in Airbus, you had little microphones and stuff like that. So, it certainly happens. I think you get more of kind of the employee, taking data sort of thing. And I mean, as an example, we don't, just practical purpose, we don't see companies in the U.S., Boeings or whatever, going, okay, we're going to go get an Airbus, right? It just, we don't necessarily see that. What we do see more is, people leaving and taking trade secrets and intellectual property. Certainly governments going, hey, what's going on with Boeing? I mean, that's an easy one. But we don't necessarily get into, kind of company to company. We're doing it at the macro level, kind of looking for the broader trends that are out there. It certainly happens, and it certainly happens, sort of government to government, and in some cases, government to individual companies. But, as an example, I just give you my opinion, and this is just my opinion, doesn't mean it's true, is that from a U.S. perspective, obviously you've seen their capabilities, they're pretty active. I haven't seen anything where the U.S. is like, okay, well, we got into this company, here's now the trade secrets for Airbus, here you go, Boeing. I mean, I just haven't seen that, right? So if you look at other countries, that isn't necessarily the case, and it's case-by-case basis where that information can be shared around. But from company to company, we've seen mostly, people who are insiders and taking piles of data and going somewhere else.
Yeah, why I ask is because 2 years ago, our CEO's mail and SMS traffic were hijacked and emailed to the Swiss government saying that our aircraft was not that good to have. So, of course, when that happens, you need to look into how it has been done and whatever. So it is there, and when the money rises up, of course, you start using other means to actually win. So.
Yeah, well, there's, just like there's botnet for hire and malware for hire, there's hacking for hire, right? Question?
Yeah, I'd like to ask you about how you identify who, because from where I am, I'm defending a couple of hundred systems, and we get attacked from one place, we ban it, then the same attack will, exactly the same, will come up from a different IP address, we ban it, and another one pops up, and another one. So obviously they have not a botnet, but they have a network of hosts, compromised hosts from which they attack.
Sure.
And so how do you identify who's attacking when they're hiding behind VPNs and maybe Tor or their networks of compromised hosts? And do you think IPv6 will make that even more difficult, or?
Well, I mean, I think what you're talking about is really location-based attribution, which is pretty hard. And we're focused more on effects-based, right? So what is the ultimate effect of that particular attack, and what are the tools that are used? You can hide IP addresses, and you can launder those all day long, but ultimately, what do you have to deal with? And you have a piece of malware, you have the attack itself, you have the tradecraft of how it unfolded, and those are things that you can't necessarily hide. Here's the file. This is what they used. Okay, well, it isn't hidden. It's right there, and then you begin to look at how that was constructed, how it was used. I mean, as I said, it isn't really all that hard. We'll see a bunch of attackers. I'll give you a simplistic example. If you're familiar with Poison Ivy, which is a remote access tool, right? People go, well, everybody can use Poison Ivy. Well, that's true. There's a bunch of configuration options for Poison Ivy. And guess what? People are lazy. They keep configuring it the same way because it's worked for them. So we really start with the malware itself, and then we look at also kind of the tradecraft of what they're after and how they're doing it, and then we just bucket them into the groups that we've been tracking for a long time. And that's how we do it. And again, as I said, there's no 100%, but I can tell you mathematically that file is pretty close to that file, and we knew that file was related to one of the pandas, right? So that's kind of the way it works. If you just do location-based attribution and blocking, I mean, that's kind of a, that's not gonna work.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi. You were actually talking about the people behind an attack, right? So now taking outsourcing to a new level, where now trends are emerging where people actually outsource the attack itself. So you can have a clear demarcation between the sponsors of the attack and the people who actually do the attack. Now, if you were to truly identify the person behind the attack, you were to be trying to figure out the sponsors, not the attackers. So how do you do that when outsourcing is also becoming a part of the attack framework right now?
Well, again, it's effect-based, right? If it was outsourced, it may be totally, disassociated with a particular group. But then you look at, okay, well, what took place in the attack? Were they going after the bidding information? Oh, happened to be bidding against oil and mineral rights? Oh, we happen to see that other places. So it's the effect of it as opposed to, it's where the attack is taking place and the effect as opposed to kind of the intermediate party. Somebody else may have done it, but there's still a specific tasking order and a goal in mind. And those are the things that we pull together, and we look at all of those across the different landscapes. And as I said, there's no, it's part art and part science, but you have a pretty good idea, and a lot of the analysts we have, they've been doing this well before CrowdStrike, right? And we have a pretty good idea of who's targeting who and how it all works. And then we make some kind of, I'm going to say educated guesses, but we take all of the data, we put it together, and we apply a confidence level to it and say, okay, this is who we think it is.
We'll take one more question.
So I'm curious if you could talk a bit about some of the markets available for vulnerabilities and how that may be changing and how that kind of complicates some of the challenges that are currently in the area of trying to keep malware and these threats under control.
Well, it's an interesting place. When I got into this field, it was bug track mailing list and people mailing source code and 0 days on that. You remember that? Now it's, an iOS vulnerability is like 200 to 500,000 for one of those. That's pretty valuable. So now there's a very effective and efficient and sometimes anonymous marketplace that's out there, and it's big business. Just look at, if you look at some of the stuff that came out of CanSec West, which is the, conference up in Canada that's run. It's $50,000 for each vulnerability associated with Firefox. So it's right now, most of the governments are, they're buying up by the truckload vulnerabilities that are out there. It's not really easy to find. You're not going to just find a 0 day. I haven't seen one 0 day where some researcher just said, hey, here's a 0 day. Let me tell you how it all worked, and I worked with the manufacturer, and we got it all fixed, and here's the code. I just haven't seen that in the last number of years. It's all behind the scenes. There's actually brokers now for these vulnerabilities. You can go to a broker, and he'll broker it out. It's kind of all anonymous, and there's a whole network of folks that are out there. So, it's just kind of the maturation of the security industry itself, and realize that that's big business, not just a hobby anymore. It's not just a bunch of folks going to DEF CON and having a few beers. It's big business for the governments. It's big business for the companies. And there's real money at stake. So, I don't know that that's good or bad. If you look at like the bug bounties that Google has, I think they've been very effective, right? They have actually fixed a lot of things that are out there, and they're doing it in a way where people, instead of going into some black market and selling their vulns, they'll just go to the manufacturer and say, hey, look, I did a bunch of research on this. I want to make your product better. You've got a published, stated list of how these vulns will be categorized and how I get paid. And they just become a disintermediary within that vulnerability market. So, okay, well, let me wrap up. Again, I really want to thank you. It's an honor to be invited down here. Hopefully, I've given you a few things to think about. It's a fantastic program in the university, and certainly something that we hope to be involved with. My last plug was we're always hiring smart, bright students. So if you have any interest, you can come grab me or talk to me, or hit me on the website later. So I'll turn it over to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, George.